I'm Rachel Bennett, 33 years old, a marketing director in Portland, Oregon. 8 months ago, I lost my baby at 16 weeks pregnant. The miscarriage didn't just take away the child I'd been dreaming about, it hollowed me out, left me wandering through my days like a ghost in my own life. My husband Daniel held me while I cried, but I could see the helplessness in his eyes. He didn't know how to fix this, and neither did I. So I threw myself into the one thing I thought I could control, building bridges with his family. I'd always felt like an outsider with the Hartwells. Linda, my mother-in-law, had a way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. Frank, Daniel's father, was polite but distant, like I was a guest who'd overstayed their welcome. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And Jessica, Daniel's sister, treated me with the kind of casual dismissal you'd give someone ringing up your groceries. But after the miscarriage, I convinced myself that family was what mattered, that if I could just prove myself, show them I belonged, maybe I'd feel whole again. When Linda mentioned they'd always dreamed of a family vacation to Cabo San Lucas but could never afford it, something clicked in my head. I'd just been promoted to marketing director, and my salary had jumped significantly. Here was my chance. I could give them this gift, bring everyone together under the Mexican sun, and maybe finally feel like I was part of something bigger than my grief. I spent weeks planning every detail. I researched resorts until my eyes burned, finally booking an oceanfront all-inclusive property with infinity pools and private beach access. I arranged deep-sea fishing for Frank, spa packages for Linda and Jessica, sunset dinner cruises for all of us. The total came to $18,500, but I didn't hesitate. I imagined us laughing over margaritas, watching the sun sink into the Pacific, creating memories that would bind us together. I pictured Linda finally looking at me with warmth, Jessica asking me about my life like she actually cared, Frank clapping Daniel on the back, while including me in their inside jokes. When I handed Linda the printed itinerary in a folder decorated with little palm trees, her eyes widened. "This is too much, Rachel," she said, but she was smiling as she flipped through the pages. Frank actually hugged me, a quick awkward embrace that still made my heart swell. Jessica texted me a string of excited emojis. For the first time since the miscarriage, I felt something like hope. The weeks leading up to the trip felt lighter. I bought a new swimsuit, researched the best local restaurants, even started learning basic Spanish phrases. Daniel seemed relieved to see me excited about something again. He'd kiss my forehead in the morning and tell me how happy he was that I was getting close to his family. I should have noticed the small things then. The way Linda stopped mentioning the trip when I was around. How Jessica's texts about Cabo suddenly went silent. The odd moment when I walked into the kitchen and Frank and Daniel stopped talking abruptly, their faces guilty. But I was too wrapped up in my own narrative, too desperate to believe that love and money could buy me a place in their world. I'd been supporting them financially for 3 years by that point, though I'd never really tallied it up. It started small, a few hundred here and there. Linda mentioned struggling with their mortgage after Frank's hours got cut at the auto shop where he worked as a manager. I sent a check. Jessica needed help with her car loan after Kevin lost his job. I covered 3 months of payments when Frank needed surgery for a herniated disc, and their insurance didn't cover everything. I paid the $4,000 balance without blinking. It felt good, being needed. Being able to solve their problems with a swipe of my card or a bank transfer. Daniel would thank me quietly, his hand on my knee, telling me how generous I was, how lucky his family was to have me. I never told him that part of me was buying their affection, that every dollar I sent was a plea to be seen as one of them. The morning I planned to call Linda about final trip details, I was sitting in my apartment in downtown Portland, rain streaking down the windows like tears. The sound of traffic on the wet streets below usually soothed me, but that day I felt restless. I opened my laptop to double-check our flight times and saw a notification on Facebook. Jessica had posted photos. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips as I clicked on her profile. There they were, all of them, On a white sand beach under a blazing sun. Linda in a wide-brimmed hat, cocktail in hand. Frank grinning in board shorts, holding up a massive fish. Jessica and Kevin making heart shapes with their hands in front of a turquoise ocean. Daniel, my husband, standing with his arm around his mother, squinting into the camera with a smile I recognized from our wedding photos. The caption read, "Best family vacation ever. Cabo was everything we dreamed of. Thank you for the memories." My hands started shaking so hard I had to set the mug down before I dropped it. I scrolled through photo after photo. Sunset dinners at the restaurant I'd booked. Spa robes from the packages I'd arranged. A shot of all of them on the fishing boat I'd reserved. Daniel was in almost every picture, laughing, relaxed, clearly having the time of his life. The photos had been posted yesterday. They'd been there for a week already. I checked the dates on my itinerary, the one I'd printed and given to Linda 2 months ago. The dates matched. This was the trip I'd paid for. The trip I'd planned down to every detail, and they'd all gone without me. Without even telling me. I sat there staring at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. There had to be an explanation. A mistake, maybe they'd changed the dates and forgotten to tell me. Maybe this was a different trip. But I knew, deep in my gut, where the truth lives before your brain catches up, I knew exactly what had happened. They'd taken my money, my gift, my desperate attempt to belong, and they'd left me behind in the rain in Portland, while they made memory under the Mexican sun. The betrayal was so complete, so casual, that for a moment I couldn't even feel it. I was numb, frozen, staring at Daniel's smiling face on a beach I'd paid for him to visit without me. Then the numbness cracked, and something hot and terrible flooded through me. My chest tightened like someone was standing on it. My breath came in short gasps. I pushed back from the laptop and paced my small living room, my mind spinning. Every excuse I tried to manufacture fell apart under the weight of those photos. This wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally take a family vacation without telling one member of the family. You don't accidentally post dozens of photos from a trip you're supposedly hiding. They hadn't forgotten about me, they'd excluded me. Deliberately, I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and pulled up Linda's number. The phone rang 3 times, and I imagined her seeing my name on the screen, deciding whether to answer. Finally, her voice came through, carefully cheerful. "Rachel. Hi, sweetie. What's up?" I couldn't match her tone. I'd lost the ability to pretend. "I saw the photos," I said, my voice flat. "The Cabo photos." There was a pause, just a fraction of a second too long, and I heard her recalibrate. "Oh," she said, and her voice shifted to something I couldn't quite name. Sympathy? Guilt? Satisfaction? "Yes, we went last week. It was wonderful. Thank you so much for your generosity." The words were right, but the delivery was all wrong. She sounded like she was reading from a script, fulfilling an obligation to acknowledge my
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
contribution while making it clear that the acknowledgement was the extent of what I was owed. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. Why wasn't I invited? Another pause, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted to something firmer. "Well, Rachel, we discussed it, and decided it would be better this way. You've been through so much with the miscarriage and your demanding job, we didn't want to burden you. Plus it was really meant to be a Hartwell family trip, you know, just us. We didn't think you'd mind, since you were so generous in offering to pay for it." The logic was so twisted, I almost couldn't track it. I'd paid for a family vacation, and somehow that meant I wasn't family enough to attend. My grief and my career were both reasons to exclude me, but not reasons to refrain from taking my money. And the way she said "just us," like I was other, like after 3 years of marriage to her son, I was still somehow outside the circle. I felt something inside me harden, like a bone setting wrong. "You took my money," I said slowly, "and you all went on vacation without me. Without even telling me you were going, and you think that's okay because I've been sad and busy. Linda's voice cooled by several degrees. Now, Rachel, there's no need to be dramatic. We thought we were doing you a favor. You've been so stressed, we didn't want to add to your plate by expecting you to travel. And frankly, sweetie, sometimes family needs time together without outsiders. I'm sure you understand. Outsiders. The word hit like a slap. I'm married to your son, I said, and my voice was shaking now. I've been helping support you financially for 3 years. How am I an outsider? Well, Linda said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully, we appreciate everything you've done, of course. But blood is blood, Rachel. The Hartwells have always been close. We have our own way of doing things. I thought after you and Daniel had a baby, you'd understand better, but since that didn't work out, well, maybe it's just different for you. The casual cruelty of mentioning my miscarriage, the suggestion that I'd failed some test by losing my baby, sent a wave of rage through me, so intense, I thought I might be sick. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking so badly, I dropped the phone. It clattered on the hardwood floor of my apartment, and I stood there in the gray morning light, rain still falling outside, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. I'd spent 3 years trying to buy my way into their approval. 3 years of writing checks, and making excuses for their coldness, and telling myself that family meant sacrifice. I'd drained my savings, delayed my own dreams, and convinced myself it was love. But love doesn't take your money and leave you behind. Love doesn't call you an outsider after you've proven your loyalty 1,000 times over. Love doesn't weaponize your grief to justify betrayal. I walked to my laptop and opened my banking app, something I'd been avoiding for months. I'd been too busy, too focused on helping them, to really look at what I'd given. The numbers that appeared on the screen made my stomach drop. Over the past 3 years, I'd transferred $65,000 to the Hartwells, $18,000 for Cabo, $28,000 in mortgage payments for their house in Beaverton, sent in installments over 2 years when Frank's income dropped, $12,000 to pay off Linda's SUV when she said they were drowning in the car loan, $4,500 for Frank's back surgery, $2,000 to clear Jessica's credit card debt when she claimed she was about to lose her apartment, $65,000. I stared at the number, watching it blur as my eyes filled with tears. That was a down payment on a house. That was a year of traveling the world. That was security, freedom, possibility, and I'd handed it over, piece by piece, to people who saw me as a convenient ATM, with an inconvenient need for recognition. I thought about all the times I'd canceled my own plans to cover their emergencies. The weekend trip to the coast, I'd skipped to send Linda mortgage money. The professional photography course I'd wanted to take but couldn't afford after paying for Jessica's car. The therapy sessions after my miscarriage that I'd cut short because Frank needed surgery money. I'd been so focused on proving I was good enough, generous enough, selfless enough to deserve their acceptance, that I'd never stopped to ask whether they deserved mine. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows, and I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by IKEA furniture I'd bought on sale because all my extra money went to them, and I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to swallow this betrayal and pretend it was fine. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing myself for people who saw my love as currency and my pain as inconvenience. Something had shifted in those phone calls, in seeing those photos, in hearing Linda call me an outsider after everything I'd given. The woman who'd been so desperate to belong, who'd measured her worth by their approval, was gone. In her place was someone harder, clearer, done with begging for scraps of affection from people who'd never seen her as family at all. I sat at my kitchen table that entire morning, the rain continuing its steady assault on the windows, and I couldn't stop replaying Linda's words. Blood is blood, Rachel, maybe it's just different for you. The phrase kept looping in my head like a song I couldn't escape, each repetition cutting deeper. I'd heard people talk about moments of clarity, those sharp instants, when everything suddenly makes sense, but this wasn't clarity. This was more like waking up from surgery to find they'd amputated the wrong limb. Everything I'd believed about my relationship with the Hartwells, every assumption I'd made about what my generosity was building, had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. They'd never seen me as family. They'd seen me as a resource. I pulled up the photos again, forcing myself to look closely at each one. There was Daniel in the infinity pool, his head thrown back in laughter at something Frank was saying. Daniel at dinner, raising a glass and a toast. Daniel on the beach at sunset, his arm around Jessica, while she leaned into him with the casual comfort of sibling affection. My husband had known. He'd known they were planning this trip without me. He'd packed a suitcase, gotten on a plane, spent a week in the sun with his family, and never once thought to call me. Never once said to his mother or father that maybe, just maybe, his wife who'd paid for the entire vacation should be included. The betrayal from the Hartwells stung, but Daniel's participation in it felt like a different kind of wound entirely. This was the man who'd held me in the hospital when we lost the baby, who'd whispered that we'd get through it together. This was the person I'd trusted with my grief, my vulnerability, my desperate need to feel anchored to something, and he'd chosen them over me without hesitation. I checked the time. It was 10 in the morning in Portland, which meant Daniel was probably still at the office. He worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, and Mondays were always busy for him. I could call him now, confront him immediately, but something held me back. I needed to think clearly, to understand the full scope of what had happened before I let emotion drive my actions. I'd spent 3 years being reactive, responding to their requests with automatic generosity, because I was afraid of what would happen if I said no. I wasn't going to make that mistake now. I opened a new document on my laptop and started writing down everything I could remember, every payment I'd made, every emergency I'd covered, every promise they'd made about paying me back someday when things got better. The promises had been vague and frequent in the beginning. Linda would say things like, "We'll make this up to you," or "We're so grateful, we won't forget this." Frank would clap me on the shoulder and say, "You're saving our lives, kiddo, we owe you big time." But the promises had faded as the requests continued, replaced by a kind of entitled expectation that I would simply handle whatever financial crisis arose. I found old text messages from Jessica, dozens of them, each following the same pattern. "Hey Rachel, hate to ask, but I'm in a bind. Hey Rachel, could you help me out just this once? Hey Rachel, you're the only person I can count on." Each message had made me feel needed, important, like I was the hero of their story. Now I could see them for what they were, carefully calibrated manipulations designed to extract money while making me feel good about giving it. I thought about the time Linda had called me crying, saying they were going to lose the house if they didn't make the mortgage payment by the end of the week. I'd transferred $3,000 that same day, panicking at the thought of them being homeless. 2 weeks later, I'd stopped by their house unannounced and found a brand new big screen television in the living room. When I'd asked about it, Linda had waved her hand dismissively and said Frank got a bonus at work. We deserved a little treat. The bonus that apparently hadn't been enough to cover the mortgage she'd claimed was about to default. I'd pushed down my doubts then, told myself I was being petty for questioning their choices. Now I wondered how many other lies I'd swallowed because the truth was too painful to examine. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Hey babe, running late tonight, don't wait up for dinner, love you." The casualness of it, the normalcy, made my hands clench into fists. He was going about his day like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just spent a week on a beach I'd paid for, while his family toasted to memories I wasn't part of. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my office and told them I was taking a personal day. My assistant Emma sounded concerned, asking if everything was okay, and I assured her it was fine, just needed to handle some family matters. The irony of the phrase wasn't lost on me. I spent the afternoon digging through files, gathering evidence. I found the wire transfer confirmations, the canceled checks, the email chains, where Linda had laid out their various crises. I created a spreadsheet, categorizing each payment by date, amount, and stated purpose. The document grew longer as the hours passed, a cold numerical record of my 3-year attempt to purchase belonging. By the time Daniel came home that evening, I had everything organized in a folder on my laptop. I heard his keys in the door, the familiar sound of him dropping his messenger bag on the bench in our entryway. "Hey Rack," he called out, his voice tired but affectionate. "I'm home. Sorry about the late night." I was sitting on the couch in the dim light of our living room, my laptop open in front of me. Daniel walked in, loosening his tie, and stopped when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. Or maybe it was guilt. I was no longer sure I could read him accurately. "I saw the photos," I said quietly. "From Cabo." He went completely still, his hand frozen on his tie, and in that moment of paralyzed silence, I knew everything I needed to know. He'd been caught, and he knew it. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, guilt, fear, calculation, before settling on something that looked like resignation. "Rachel," he started, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I said, "just don't. I need you to tell me the truth. Did you know they were planning to go without me?" He stood there for a long moment, and I watched him wrestle with whether to lie. Finally, his shoulders sagged and he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. I knew. The confirmation hurt, even though I'd expected it. Hearing him admit it made it real in a way the photos hadn't. "Why?" I asked, and my voice cracked on the word. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you insist I come with you?" "It's my family's trip, Rachel," he said, and there was a defensive edge creeping into his tone. "You paid for it, and we're grateful, but they wanted it to be just us. Just the Hartwells. They thought it would be awkward with you there." "Awkward," I repeated, tasting the word. "It would be awkward for me to attend the vacation I paid $18,000 for." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd always found endearing, but now just looked like exasperation. "You don't understand what it's like," he said. "My family has always been close. They have certain expectations about how things should be. They wanted this time together, just the four of us, like when we were kids. They didn't mean it as an insult to you." I stood up, my laptop falling closed with a sharp snap. "4 of you," I said. "You, your parents, and Jessica. So where does that leave me, Daniel? Where does your wife fit into this family picture?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "You know it's complicated," he said. "You and my mom have never really clicked. She thinks you're too focused on your career, that you don't understand family values. And after the miscarriage, she thought maybe you needed space anyway. She was trying to be considerate." I laughed, a harsh sound that didn't contain any humor. "Considerate," I said. "She took my money and called me an outsider to my face this morning, but sure, let's call that considerate." Daniel's eyes widened. "She said that?" I nodded. "Blood is blood, Daniel." "That's what she told me. Said maybe I'd understand family better if the miscarriage hadn't happened, but since I failed at that, I guess I'm just on the outside looking in." His face flushed with anger, but I couldn't tell if it was directed at his mother or at me for putting him in this position. "That's not fair," he said. "She didn't mean it like that. You're taking it out of context." I stared at my husband, this man I'd built a life with, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Or maybe I'd always been married to a stranger, and had just refused to see it. "There's no context that makes that okay," I said quietly. "There's no context where it's acceptable for your mother to use my miscarriage as justification for excluding me from a trip I paid for. And there's no context where it's okay that you went along with it." Daniel sat down heavily on the armchair, his head in his hands. "What do you want me to say?" "Rachel, that I should have fought harder for you to come. That I should have refused to go. My family has always had issues with boundaries. You knew that when you married me. I did know that. I'd known it from the beginning, from the engagement when Linda had taken me aside and told me that Hartwell men needed strong family support, that wives came and went, but mothers were forever. I'd laughed it off then. Thought it was just an awkward attempt at mother-in-law humor. Now I could see it had been a warning, a preview of exactly where I'd rank in the family hierarchy. I've given your family $65,000 over the past 3 years, I said, and watched his head snap up in shock. He clearly hadn't known the total. I'd been handling the finances, making the transfers, and he'd never asked for details beyond thanking me for being generous. $65,000, Daniel. That's not just helping out with a few bills. That's significant money. That's our future I've been giving away. He looked genuinely stunned. I didn't know it was that much, he said weakly. I knew you helped out sometimes, but I didn't realize it had added up like that, because you didn't want to know. I said. You were happy to let me play the hero, to be the solution to all your family's problems, as long as you didn't have to think too hard about what it was costing us, what it was costing me. Daniel stood up, his own anger finally surfacing. That's not fair, he said, his voice rising. You offered to help them. You said you wanted to contribute. I never forced you to give them money. You're right, I said, my voice deadly calm. You never forced me. You just stood by and watched while your family took everything I offered and then excluded me from the one thing I actually wanted, which was to feel like I belonged. You let your mother call me an outsider. You went on vacation without me, and smiled in every photo like it was perfectly normal. You chose them over me, over and over, and you're standing here acting like I'm the one being unreasonable. We stood there in our living room, the space between us feeling like a vast chasm that had opened up in the span of a single day. The rain outside had finally stopped, leaving behind that particular Portland silence that feels heavier than sound. Where are you going? Daniel asked as I walked toward our bedroom. I need some space, I said, without turning around. I need to think. I closed the bedroom door and sat on the edge of our bed, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. This morning I'd woken up as a woman with a family, complicated and imperfect but mine. Tonight I was sitting alone in a bedroom, realizing that the family I'd been trying so hard to be part of had never wanted me in the first place. And my husband, the person who was supposed to be my partner, my advocate, my safe place, had been complicit in my exclusion all along. I heard Daniel moving around in the living room, the clink of a glass, the sound of the television turning on and then quickly off again. He knocked softly on the bedroom door, but I didn't answer. After a few minutes, I heard his footsteps retreat, and then the apartment was quiet except for the ambient noise of the city below. I opened my laptop again and looked at the spreadsheet I'd created, all those numbers representing not just money, but hope, effort, the earnest belief that love could be earned through generosity. I'd been so naive. I'd thought that if I could just prove how valuable I was, how reliable and generous and willing to sacrifice, they'd eventually accept me. But acceptance isn't something you can buy, and people who see you as a transaction will never suddenly start seeing you as family. I thought about calling Nicole, my best friend since college, but it was late and I wasn't ready to say the words out loud yet. Speaking them would make them real in a way they weren't quite yet. Right now it still felt like something I might wake up from, a nightmare that would dissolve in the morning light. But I knew it wasn't a nightmare, it was just the truth, finally revealing itself after 3 years of me refusing to see it. I pulled up my banking app on my phone and looked at my accounts. My savings, once healthy from years of careful planning and a good salary, had been depleted to a fraction of what it should have been. My checking account had enough to cover my bills, but not much else. The retirement account I'd been contributing to had been untouched, at least, a small mercy. I'd sacrificed my present to fund their lifestyle, but I hadn't completely destroyed my future. Not yet. I navigated to the section of my banking app that controlled automatic transfers and recurring payments. Over the years, I'd set up several to make it easier to help the Hartwells. $500 on the first of every month went directly to their mortgage company. $200 on the 15th covered Linda's car insurance. Another $100 went to their utility company. I'd automated their financial support the same way I automated my own bill payments, turning my generosity into a system that required no thought, no conscious decision. Just money flowing out of my account and into their lives, month after month, invisible and expected. I stared at the list of recurring payments, my finger hovering over the screen. This was the first real decision I'd made in 3 years that wasn't about trying to win their approval. This was about protecting myself, drawing a boundary, saying enough. I deleted the mortgage payment first, watching the confirmation message pop up. Transfer canceled, then the car insurance. Canceled, the utilities. Canceled, there was a credit card payment I'd been making for Jessica for the past 6 months, helping her rebuild her credit. Canceled, each deletion felt like cutting a rope that had been binding me to them, and with each one I felt simultaneously lighter and more terrified. What I was doing felt huge, irreversible, the kind of action that would have consequences I couldn't fully predict. But I'd spent 3 years being careful, being generous, being accommodating, and where had it gotten me? Sitting alone in my bedroom, while my husband watched television in the other room, both of us, pretending that our marriage wasn't fracturing under the weight of his family's dysfunction. I wasn't going to be careful anymore. I wasn't going to sacrifice myself on the altar of their comfort. I took a screenshot of each cancellation confirmation and saved them to a folder on my phone. Some instinct told me I might need proof of this later, evidence of the day I stopped being their solution to every problem. When I was done, I felt hollowed out, but strangely clear-headed. Tomorrow would bring reactions, consequences, probably anger and accusations, but tonight, I'd taken my first step toward reclaiming my life from people who'd been draining it for years. I lay down on top of the covers, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Through the bedroom door, I could hear Daniel's phone ringing, Linda's name probably lighting up his screen. He'd be getting the call I knew was coming, the one where his mother realized the money had stopped flowing. I wondered what he'd say to her, whose side he'd take, whether he'd defend me or apologize for me. I wondered if it even mattered anymore. The truth was settling into my bones, like winter cold, unavoidable and penetrating. My marriage might not survive this. The Hartwells had been a package deal from the beginning, and Daniel had shown me tonight exactly where his loyalties lay. He hadn't fought for me to be included in Cabo. He hadn't stood up to his mother's cruel words about my miscarriage. He'd participated in my exclusion, and then come home expecting everything to be normal, expecting me to keep playing my role as the family bank account who asked no questions and made no demands. I heard him answer his phone, his voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone, defensive and placating. He was talking to Linda, almost certainly, doing damage control. Part of me wanted to march out there and take the phone, to tell Linda myself that the gravy train had reached its final stop, but I stayed where I was, letting Daniel handle the conversation, curious to see what he'd do when forced to choose between his wife's financial boundaries and his family's expectations. The call lasted nearly 20 minutes. When it ended, I heard Daniel's footsteps approach the bedroom door again. "Rachel," he said through the door, his voice strained. "My mom just called. She said all the payments stopped. Did you cancel them?" "Yes," I said clearly, "I did." There was a long silence. "We need to talk about this," he said. "They're counting on that money, they're going to be in real trouble without it. Then they should get jobs that pay better," I said, "or cut their expenses. Or maybe ask themselves why they think it's acceptable to take money from someone they consider an outsider." Daniel tried the door handle, but I'd locked it. "Rachel, please," he said, and now he sounded desperate. "You can't just cut them off like this. They're my family, they're your family too." "Are they?" I asked, "because your mother made it pretty clear today that I'm not actually family. Blood is blood, remember, so maybe your blood family should support each other, and I'll focus on supporting myself from now on." I heard him lean against the door, the soft thump of his forehead against the wood. "This isn't just about them," he said quietly, "this is about us too. You're my wife, what you do affects me." "I'm aware," I said. The way you treat me affects me too. The way you let your family treat me affects me. But that didn't seem to matter when you were all having a great time in Cabo on my dime. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, I heard Daniel walk away, and a few minutes later the apartment door opened and closed. He'd left, probably to drive to his parents' house to deal with the crisis in person. The crisis being that they'd have to actually pay their own bills for the first time in 3 years. I should have felt guilty. Part of me expected to feel guilty, to be tormented by the idea that I was causing them hardship. But all I felt was a strange calm, the kind that comes after you've finally stopped fighting against something and just let it be. They'd made their choices, they'd taken my money, and excluded me from their family circle. They'd used my grief and my desperate need to belong as leverage to extract more from me, and now they were going to learn what it felt like when the person they'd been exploiting finally said no. I pulled out my phone and opened a text thread with Nicole. Even though it was late, I knew she'd still be awake. She was a night owl, always had been. I typed out a message, "Are you up? Need to talk." Her response came within seconds, "Always up for you. Call me." I hit the call button, and she answered on the first ring. "What happened?" she asked, her voice instantly concerned. "You never text like that unless something's wrong." I told her everything. The photos, the phone call with Linda, the confrontation with Daniel, the cancelled payments. The words poured out of me in a rush, 3 years of suppressed doubt, and hurt finally finding voice. Nicole listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a moment of silence before she spoke. "Holy shit, Rachel," she said finally. "I knew his family was difficult, but I had no idea it was this bad. How are you holding up?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like I should be more upset than I am. Like I should be crying or panicking or something. But mostly I just feel numb, and maybe a little relieved." "That's not weird," Nicole said firmly. "You've been carrying an impossible burden for years. Relief makes sense. Your body knows you just set down something heavy, even if your brain hasn't caught up yet." "Do you think I'm being too harsh?" I asked. "Canceling all the payments, without warning them first?" Nicole laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief. "Are you kidding? Rachel, they went on a vacation you paid for, and didn't invite you. Daniel's mother called you an outsider and weaponized your miscarriage to justify it. If anything, you're being too nice by just canceling the payments, instead of demanding they pay you back every cent." I hadn't even thought about asking for the money back. It seemed impossible, like trying to unring a bell. The money was gone, spent, transformed into mortgage payments, and car insurance, and a week in Cabo that I'd never get to experience. But Nicole's words sparked something in me, a small flame of righteous anger that I'd been trying to suppress. Why shouldn't they pay me back? They'd taken the money under the pretense that we were family, that they appreciated my help, that they'd make it up to me someday. Those had all been lies, or at least misleading enough to count as lies. If they didn't consider me family, then the money I'd given them wasn't a gift. It was a loan, and loans were supposed to be repaid. "You should talk to a lawyer," Nicole said, reading my thoughts. "I know someone actually, Catherine Reynolds. She handled my sister's divorce last year, and she was amazing. Really sharp, doesn't take any shit. Want me to text you her number?" "Yes," I said immediately, "thank you." We talked for another hour, Nicole sharing stories about her own experiences, setting boundaries with difficult family members, reassuring me that what I was feeling was normal and justified. By the time we hung up, I felt steadier, less alone. I wasn't crazy for being hurt. I wasn't selfish for protecting my finances. I was just finally, belatedly, standing up for myself. I fell asleep that night, still in my clothes, my phone clutched in my hand, and I dreamed of endless beaches that I walked alone, leaving footprints in sand that the tide immediately erased. Daniel didn't come home that night. I woke up Tuesday morning to an empty apartment, and a text message sent at 2 in the morning, "Staying at my parents' house. They're really upset. We need to figure this out." I read the message 3 times, looking for any acknowledgement that maybe I had a right to be upset too, that maybe his parents' feelings weren't the only ones that mattered. There was nothing, just the assumption that I was the problem that needed to be fixed, the squeaky wheel disrupting the smooth operation of Hartwell family dynamics. I got ready for work on autopilot, choosing a navy suit that made me feel armored and professional. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked the same as always, but I felt fundamentally altered, like I'd shed a skin overnight, and was still figuring out how to move in this new version of myself. At the office, I threw myself into a presentation for a client pitch, grateful for the distraction. My colleague James stopped by my desk around 10 with coffee and a concerned expression. "You okay?" he asked. "You seem somewhere else today." "Just family stuff," I said, taking the coffee gratefully. "Nothing I can't handle." He nodded, accepting the deflection, and I appreciated that he didn't push. Work had always been my refuge, the one place where my value was quantifiable and recognized. Nobody here cared about my relationship with my in-laws, they cared about whether I could deliver results, and I always could. During my lunch break, I pulled up the number Nicole had texted me and called Catherine Reynolds' office. The receptionist who answered had a brisk, efficient voice that I found immediately comforting. "Reynolds Law Group, how may I direct your call?" "I'd like to schedule a consultation with Miss Reynolds," I said. "It's regarding a family financial matter." She took my information and offered me an appointment for Thursday afternoon. I hesitated, thinking about my work calendar, then remembered that I'd been prioritizing everyone else's needs over mine for 3 years. It was time to make myself the priority. "Thursday works perfectly," I said. "Thank you." The rest of Tuesday passed in a blur of meetings and emails. My phone buzzed periodically, with texts from Daniel, each one a variation on the same theme. "My mom is really hurt. Dad says they can't make the mortgage this month without your help. Jessica is crying, says she thought you cared about us." I didn't respond to any of them. What was there to say? That I did care, which was why their betrayal cut so deep. That their financial crisis wasn't my emergency. That Jessica's tears were probably as manufactured as her previous emergencies had been. I'd spent years responding to their requests immediately, dropping everything to solve their problems. Let them sit with the silence for a while, let them wonder what I was thinking, what I was planning, let them feel a fraction of the uncertainty and exclusion I'd felt looking at those vacation photos. Wednesday morning brought a new development. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello, Rachel," a male voice said, unfamiliar and formal. "This is Richard Morrison. I'm an attorney representing Frank and Linda Hartwell. They've asked me to reach out to you regarding some financial matters." My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "I see, and what financial matters would those be?" Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. "The Hartwells have shared with me that you've been providing financial support to them for several years, which they understood to be gifts made out of familial affection and duty. They're concerned that your recent cessation of these payments, combined with some concerning behavior they've witnessed, suggests you may not be in a stable mental or emotional state to be making financial decisions." My hand tightened on the phone. "Excuse me, I'm calling to inform you that my clients are prepared to file a petition with the court seeking a review of your financial competency," he continued, his tone professionally neutral. "They're worried about you, Mrs. Bennett, and they want to ensure you're protected from making decisions you might regret. They believe that with proper oversight, we can restore the support arrangement that was working well for everyone involved." The audacity of it took my breath away. They'd gone on vacation without me, called me an outsider, and now they were threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent because I'd stopped funding their lifestyle. It was so perfectly calculated, so brazenly manipulative, that for a moment I couldn't even formulate a response. "Mrs. Bennett," Mr. Morrison said into my silence. "I know this must be difficult to hear, but my clients have your best interests at heart. If you're willing to reinstate the financial support, and perhaps seek some counseling to address whatever stress you're experiencing, we can avoid the need for legal intervention. I found my voice, and it came out cold and clear. Mr. Morrison, I said, I'm a marketing director at a successful firm. I have no history of mental illness, no substance abuse issues, no erratic behavior beyond declining to continue supporting adults who should be supporting themselves. If your clients choose to pursue this legally, I'll be more than happy to demonstrate my competency in court. And while we're discussing legal matters, perhaps we should also discuss the $65,000 I've given them over the past 3 years, which I'm now considering requesting they repay. There was a brief pause. Mrs. Bennett, those were gifts, he said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. My understanding is that you gave freely, without any expectation of repayment. Did your clients mention that they took a vacation I paid for, and deliberately excluded me from attending? I asked. Did they mention that my mother-in-law told me I'm not really family, because gifts between family members generally require the parties to actually consider each
Other family, don't you think? Another pause, longer this time. I'll relay your position to my clients, he said finally. But I'd encourage you to think carefully about your next steps. Legal proceedings can be costly and emotionally draining. It would be better for everyone if we could resolve this amicably. I ended the call without responding and immediately texted Catherine Reynolds' office, asking if there was any way to move my appointment up. The receptionist called me back within 10 minutes. Miss Reynolds had a cancellation this afternoon at 3 if I could make it. I told my assistant I had a family emergency and left the office early, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and fear. The Hartwells weren't just upset about losing their financial support. They were going on the offensive, trying to paint me as unstable so they could regain control of my money. It was more than manipulation. It was a kind of financial abuse, and the realization of what they'd been doing to me for years hit me with fresh force. Catherine Reynolds' office was in a renovated building in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and modern glass. The waiting room had the kind of expensive, minimalist furniture that suggested the lawyer inside knew her worth. I'd barely sat down when a woman in her mid-40s emerged from the inner office, her hand extended. "Rachel Bennett, I'm Catherine Reynolds, come on back." Her office was lined with law books and diplomas from Georgetown, and she gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk. "So," she said, settling into her own chair with a legal pad in front of her, "Nicole gave me a brief overview, but I'd like to hear the full story from you. Start wherever feels right." I told her everything. The whole 3-year saga of supporting the Hartwells, the Cabo vacation, Linda's cruel words, Daniel's complicity, and finally, this morning's threatening call from Richard Morrison. Catherine took notes as I spoke, her expression neutral but focused, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Okay," she said. "First things first. The competency threat is almost certainly a bluff. You have a steady job, you're clearly articulate and rational, and cutting off financial support to people who betrayed you is not evidence of mental instability. In fact, I'd argue it's evidence of excellent judgment. But we should take it seriously enough to be prepared." I nodded, relief flooding through me. That's what I thought, but hearing him say it made me doubt myself. "That's exactly what they're counting on," Catherine said. "Abusers, and yes, I'm comfortable calling this financial abuse, often use official-sounding threats to make their victims question their own reality. The legal system can be weaponized that way. But we're not going to let that happen." She flipped to a fresh page on her legal pad. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to send a letter to Mr. Morrison making it clear that you're represented by counsel and that any further communication should go through me. Second, we're going to document everything. Every payment you made, every text message, every conversation. Third, we're going to have you evaluated by a psychologist, Dr. Michael Foster. He does competency evaluations, and having a professional assessment will shut down any attempt to claim you're not capable of managing your finances. How does that sound?" "Like a plan," I said, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. "What about getting the money back? Is that even possible?" Catherine tilted her head, considering. "It's complicated," she said. "Generally, gifts don't have to be repaid, But there are arguments we could make. If you can show that the money was given based on false pretenses, or that there was an implied promise of repayment, or that they exerted undue influence over you, we might have a case. The fact that they excluded you from a vacation you paid for could support an argument that they were deliberately deceiving you about the nature of your relationship. It's not a slam dunk, but it's not hopeless either. What about Daniel? I asked quietly. Where does he fit into all this? Catherine's expression softened slightly. That's a question only you can answer, she said. From a legal perspective, you're married, which means your finances are entangled. If you're considering divorce, that's a separate but related matter. If you want to try to save the marriage, you'll need to figure out if he's willing to set boundaries with his family. Either way, I'd recommend couples counseling, but I'd also recommend protecting your assets in the meantime. Can you open a separate bank account that he doesn't have access to? I hadn't thought of that, but it made immediate sense. Yes, I said. I can do that today. Good, Catherine said. Move half of your liquid assets into that account. It's not about hiding money from him. It's about making sure that if his family pressures him, he can't drain your accounts to support them. Document the transfer and the reason for it. Keep everything transparent, but keep it protected. We talked for another 30 minutes, going over strategy and next steps. When I left her office, I had a clear action plan and, for the first time since seeing those vacation photos, a sense that I wasn't facing this alone. I stopped at Columbia Bank on my way home and opened a new savings account, transferring exactly half of my checking and savings balances into it. The teller who helped me was a young woman named Sophie, who made friendly small talk about the weather, completely unaware that she was helping me financially separate from my husband's family. That evening, I sat in my apartment eating takeout Thai food and going through my phone screenshotting every text message exchange with Linda, Frank, and Jessica for the past 3 years. There were hundreds of them, and reading through them chronologically told a story I'd been too close to see while living it. The early messages were friendly, warm even. Linda would send me recipes she thought I'd like. Frank would text to say he'd seen a marketing article that made him think of me. Jessica would share memes and jokes. But gradually, the warm messages decreased and the requests for money increased, until our entire relationship seemed to consist of them asking and me giving. I found the text exchange from when Linda had asked me to pay for the Cabo trip. I'd completely forgotten the specific wording, but now I read it with new eyes. Rachel, honey, I know this is a huge ask, but Frank and I have always dreamed of taking the kids to Mexico for a real family vacation. With money being tight, it's just never been possible. If there was any way you could help make that dream come true, we'd be so grateful. It would mean the world to have the whole family together somewhere beautiful. We could really bond and make memories. The whole family together. That's what she had said. She'd lied to my face, or at least misled me so thoroughly that the whole
Distinction didn't matter. I'd said yes immediately, thrilled at the idea of the whole family together, imagining myself finally fully included in their circle. And they'd taken my money and made memories without me. I saved the screenshot to my evidence folder and kept scrolling. There was a text from Jessica from 6 months ago. "You're literally the best sister-in-law ever. I don't know what we'd do without you." I remembered how that message had made me feel. Validated and valued and necessary. Now I could see it for what it was. Maintenance. She was keeping me invested, making sure I felt appreciated enough to keep the money flowing. It was calculated, strategic, and devastatingly effective. My phone rang, startling me out of my documentary project. It was Daniel. I considered not answering, but we were going to have to talk eventually. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Rachel?" he said, and he sounded exhausted. "We need to talk. My parents got a lawyer. They're saying you're having some kind of breakdown." "I know," I said. "The lawyer called me this morning. I have my own attorney now." There was silence on the other end. "You hired a lawyer?" he said finally. "Against my parents? Against your family?" "They threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could control my money," I said. "So yes, I hired a lawyer.
And before you say anything else, you should know that I'm documenting everything. Every payment, every conversation, every text message. If they want to take this to court, I'm prepared. Rachel, this is insane, Daniel said, his voice rising. They're not trying to control your money. They're worried about you. You've been acting strange ever since you found out about Cabo. You cut them off without warning. You won't talk to me. Can you honestly say that's normal behavior? I felt anger flare hot in my chest. Normal? I said. You want to talk about normal behavior? Is it normal to take someone's money and exclude them from the trip they paid for? Is it normal for a mother to tell her daughter-in-law she's not really family? Is it normal for a husband to go on vacation without his wife and never think to mention it? There was a long pause. I didn't know what to do, Daniel said quietly. My mom planned the whole thing and told me you'd understand, that you were too busy with work anyway. I should have said something. I should have insisted you come. But Rachel, you have to understand, my family has always been this way. They're set in their patterns. It doesn't mean they don't care about you. They do, I said, my voice breaking despite my attempt to stay calm. They care about my bank account. That's all they've ever cared about. And you let them treat me that way because it was easier than standing up to them. Do you know how that feels? To realize that your own husband values his parents' comfort more than his wife's dignity? I didn't mean for it to be like this, he said, and he sounded genuinely distressed. I love you, Rachel. I don't want to lose you. But they're my family. I can't just cut them off. You're asking me to choose between you and them. No, I said. I'm asking you to be my partner, to set boundaries, to tell your mother that calling me an outsider is not acceptable, to stand up for me when they try to manipulate and control me. I'm not asking you to cut them off. I'm asking you to stop letting them walk all over us. Can you do that? The silence stretched out so long, I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he said, I don't know. I need time to think. Take all the time you need, I said. But while you're thinking, I'm protecting myself. I've moved money into a separate account. I've hired a lawyer. I'm not going to be their ATM anymore. And I'm not going to apologize for that. If you can't support me in setting basic boundaries, then maybe we need to think about whether this marriage can work. I heard him inhale sharply. Are you talking about divorce? I'm talking about reality, I said. I'm talking about the fact that I've been in a one-sided marriage where your family comes first and I come somewhere down the list. I'm talking about respecting myself enough to not accept that anymore. So yes, if that means divorce, then maybe that's where we're headed. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking. Saying the word divorce out loud had made it real. A possibility that had been hovering at the edges of my consciousness, but that I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. My marriage might actually end over this. The thought was terrifying and liberating in the same measure. I spent the rest of the evening continuing to document everything, creating a timeline of financial support with corresponding text messages and emails. By the time I went to bed, I had a comprehensive file that told the story of 3 years of systematic exploitation. It was painful to see it laid out so clearly, but it was also validating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was simply finally seeing the truth that had been in front of me all along. Thursday afternoon, I sat in Dr. Michael Foster's office for my competency evaluation. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a manner that put me immediately at ease. Catherine had explained that this was standard procedure, just a professional assessment that would document my mental state and capacity to make financial decisions. Dr. Foster asked me questions about my work, my education, my daily routines. He gave me some cognitive tests, simple puzzles and memory exercises. We talked about the situation with the Hartwells, and I explained what had happened. At the end of the 2-hour session, he set down his notes and looked at me directly. Mrs. Bennett, I'm going to be completely straightforward with you. There is absolutely nothing in this evaluation that suggests any impairment in your judgment or decision-making capacity. You're articulate, logical, emotionally appropriate to the situation you're describing, and clearly capable of managing your own affairs. In fact, I'd say that recognizing a toxic dynamic and setting boundaries shows excellent judgment, not poor judgment. The relief I felt was enormous. I'd known intellectually that I wasn't having a breakdown, but having a professional confirm it made it real in a way my own certainty couldn't. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." He smiled. "I'll prepare a written report for your attorney, but off the record, I want you to know that what you're describing is a classic pattern of financial abuse within families. It's more common than people think, and it's often difficult for the person experiencing it to recognize because it's wrapped in language about love and family duty. The fact that you've recognized it and are taking steps to protect yourself is something to be proud of, not ashamed of." I left his office feeling lighter than I had in days. That evening, Catherine called to tell me she'd sent a letter to Richard Morrison outlining my legal representation and making it clear that any competency challenge would be vigorously defended.
Defended. She'd also included a pointed mention of the Cabo vacation and suggested that if the Hartwells wanted to avoid an ugly legal battle, they might want to reconsider their approach. "Do you think they'll back down?" I asked. "Hard to say," Catherine replied. "People who are used to getting their way don't always respond rationally when someone finally says no. But we've shown them we're serious, and that you're not the easy target they thought you were. That might be enough." Friday morning, I woke to discover that Linda had posted on Facebook. It was a long, emotional message about how hard it was when family members went through mental health crises, how important it was to be patient and loving even when they pushed you away, how she was praying for healing and restoration. She didn't mention my name, but the implication was clear to anyone who knew our situation. Several of her friends had commented with supportive messages about how strong she was, how difficult it must be to deal with such a situation. I stared at the post, feeling anger rise in my throat. She was crafting a narrative, painting herself as the long-suffering mother-in-law dealing with an unstable daughter-in-law. It was a preemptive strike, shaping public opinion before I could tell my side of the story. Nicole called within minutes of the post going up. "I just saw Linda's Facebook," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Please tell me you're not going to let her get away with that." "I'm documenting it," I said. "Catherine says it might actually help our case, shows a pattern of manipulation and defamation. But no, I'm not going to respond publicly. I'm not going to get into a social media war with my mother-in-law." "Good," Nicole said. "Take the high road. Let her show everyone what kind of person she really is. The people who matter will see through it." I hope she was right, but I couldn't help feeling exposed, vulnerable to Linda's narrative in a way I had no control over. This was her territory, this public performance of wounded motherhood. I'd been playing by rules I didn't fully understand for 3 years, and now that I'd stepped out of line, she was showing me just how ruthless she could be. That weekend, I stayed in my apartment, ignoring phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize and texts from Daniel that ranged from apologetic to angry to pleading. I meal prepped for the week, watched movies, and tried to remember what it felt like to just exist without the constant weight of trying to please the Hartwells. Sunday evening, Daniel showed up at the apartment. I saw him on the security camera I'd installed, standing at the door with his key in his hand. He tried it, found that I had changed the locks, and knocked instead. "Rachel," he called through the door, "please, we need to talk face to face." I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, his hair uncombed. "Can I come in?" he asked. We stood there, in the doorway, and I realized I didn't want him in my space, didn't want his presence contaminating the sanctuary I'd been building. "We can talk here," I said. "Whatever you need to say, you can say it from there.